The unexamined life is not worth living. You heard that one before?
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
It's Socrates, right? It's one of
Oh,
those quotes that just sticks with you.
yeah, it really makes you think. It's kind of profound, isn't it?
Profound, but maybe a little intimidating too.
Right.
Like, how do you actually examine your life, especially in our world, right?
Yeah.
Social media, AI, it's like we're bombarded with information all the time.
Yeah, it's easy to get overwhelmed and just kind of tune it all out. Or just accept what you see without really questioning it.
Which is kind of the opposite of what Socrates was all about, wasn't it? Question everything, challenge assumptions.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. The power of questioning. Can it actually lead to a better, more fulfilling life?
I love that. A deep dive into questioning itself.
Right. We're going deep on this one. And to do that, we need to go back to the source. Ancient Greece, Socrates himself.
All right, so Socrates 101. Who was this guy? What do we actually know about him?
Well, he was an Athenian philosopher,
Huh?
but not the kind you might picture, lecturing from some ivory tower.
Right.
He wasn't writing books or leading a formal school or anything.
So where did he do his philosophizing?
In the marketplace, just striking up conversations with everyday people.
Wow, that's really interesting. So like a public philosopher.
Exactly, engaging with people where they were at. And we know about this mostly through Plato's dialogues. They give us a glimpse into how Socrates thought and operated.
Plato was his student, right?
Yeah.
So those dialogues, they're kind of like transcripts of their conversations.
In a way, yeah. And we also have some writings from Xenophon. He was another contemporary of Socrates, and he offers a slightly different perspective.
Okay, so multiple viewpoints. Always good to get a more complete picture. Really good. But you mentioned someone else earlier, Aristophanes.
Ah, yes, Aristophanes. He was a playwright, a comedian. He wrote a play called Clouds. And, well, let's just say he took a more satirical approach to portraying Socrates.
So not exactly a fan.
Let's just say he had some fun at Socrates' expense. But even that speaks to the impact Socrates had. He was clearly a figure who stirred things up. People had strong opinions about him.
Like the saying, right? The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
Exactly. And Socrates was definitely being talked about, loved by some, ridiculed by others, but he got people thinking, and that was his whole point. To challenge people's assumptions, to make them question what they thought they knew.
All right, so let's get into how he actually did that, the Socratic method. He said it's about asking the right questions. But what does that even mean? What makes a question the right question?
Well, it's not about having all the answers.
Okay.
It's about asking the kinds of questions that lead to deeper understanding, the kinds of questions that make you examine your own beliefs.
I think I get it, but can you give us an example? Like, how did this work in practice?
Sure. One of the best examples comes from Plato's dialogue, Euthyphro. Socrates runs into this guy, Euthyphro, who's putting his own father on trial.
Wow, that's intense. What for?
Well, Euthyphro claims it's a matter of piety. He says he's doing the right thing, the pious thing. And Socrates, being Socrates, he can't just let that go. So he asks him, what is piety?
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. It seems like a simple question. But as they talk, Euthyphro starts to realize he can't actually define piety. He gets tangled up in his own words.
So Socrates wasn't trying to win an argument or anything. It was more about exposing the flaws in Euthyphro's thinking.
Exactly. And in doing so, he's forcing Euthyphro and us as readers to confront something really important. We often use words without really understanding what they mean. We talk about justice, piety, truth, but do we really know what we're talking about?
Right. It's like we have these assumptions, these beliefs, but we don't always examine them.
And that's where the Socratic method comes in. It's about pushing us to go beyond those superficial understandings, to dig deeper, to ask why.
It's making me think about how much we take for granted, you know?
Okay.
We just accept things without really questioning them.
And that's what Socrates was fighting against. He believed that the unexamined life was not worth living. And that's a powerful idea, isn't it?
It really is. But let's be honest, sometimes it's easier to just go along with the crowd, not to rock the boat. Do you think Socrates would have been canceled in our world today? I mean, was he ever criticized for his questioning back then?
Oh, absolutely. He was a controversial figure. People felt threatened by his questioning. They thought he was corrupting the youth, undermining traditional beliefs. And remember, Aristophanes. His play Clouds is a perfect example of how Socrates was ridiculed and mocked.
So yeah, maybe he wouldn't have lasted long on Twitter.
Who knows? But the point is, he wasn't afraid to ask difficult questions, to challenge the status quo. And that's a lesson we can all learn from.
I agree. It's about being willing to be uncomfortable, to think critically, even when it's hard.
Exactly. Because that's how we grow, that's how we learn, and that's how we get closer to the truth.
And that's what makes the Socratic method so relevant, even today. It's not just about ancient Greece. It's about how we think, how we learn, how we live our lives.
And that's what we'll continue to explore as we go deeper into this deep dive.
I'm ready for it. Let's keep questioning.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
It's amazing to think how Socrates, just by talking to people in the marketplace, ended up influencing education for centuries.
Right. I mean, he didn't have a school, didn't write any books, but his impact is undeniable.
Yeah, and we see that through Plato, right? He founded the Academy, which basically took that conversational approach to learning and made it into a whole system.
Exactly. At the Academy, it wasn't just about lectures and memorization. It was about dialogue, debate, really grappling with ideas.
So the Socratic method wasn't just something Socrates did. It became a way of teaching.
Absolutely. And that approach, in different forms, has been passed down through history. Even today, you see it in classrooms, law schools, even business settings.
That's interesting. I guess I always thought of the Socratic method as something very specific to, like, philosophy class or something.
Well, yeah, it's definitely used in philosophy, but it's really more about a mindset, a way of approaching information.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Sure. Think about traditional teaching, right? It's often about the teacher giving information, the students absorbing it, taking notes, memorizing facts.
Right.
The Socratic method flips that. It's not about passively receiving information. It's about actively constructing your own understanding through questioning.
So instead of just memorizing a definition, you're encouraged to really think about what it means.
Exactly. And how it connects to other things you know and what the implications are.
I see. So it's not just about knowing the right answer. It's about the process of getting there, of figuring things out.
Exactly. And that process helps develop critical thinking skills, intellectual humility, the ability to see multiple perspectives.
Which are all pretty essential skills no matter what you're doing in life.
Absolutely, especially in our world today. We're constantly bombarded with information, social media, news, opinions. It's hard to know what to believe.
It really is. And it's so easy to get caught in those echo chambers online, surrounded by people who already agree with you.
And that's where the Socratic method can be so valuable. It teaches you to question everything, even your own beliefs, to be open to other perspectives.
That's like a defense mechanism against misinformation and bias.
In a way, yeah. It helps you develop that critical lens, that ability to step back and say, okay, wait a minute. Is this really true? What are the other sides of this issue?
So it's not just about winning arguments or proving someone wrong. It's about getting closer to the truth.
Right. And realizing that the truth is often complex. There might not be a simple answer.
Okay, so we've talked about Socrates as this master questioner, his influence on education, and how the Socratic method can help us be more discerning thinkers.
Right.
But we live in a digital world now. Does all this technology we have, does it help or hinder this kind of deep questioning?
That's a good question. On the one hand, we have access to more information than ever before. We can research anything, connect with people all over the world, explore different viewpoints.
So in theory, the internet should be like this amazing tool for learning and critical thinking.
You would think so, right? But the reality is more complicated. There's also a lot of misinformation out there. Propaganda. Algorithms designed to keep you in your own little bubble.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
All this potential for knowledge and connection, but also for manipulation and division.
Exactly. And that's where Plato's warnings become so relevant. He was worried about the power of rhetoric, the ability to use language to persuade, to deceive.
Right, like in Theaetetus, where he talks about the importance of carefully examining our beliefs.
Exactly. We can't just accept everything we see or hear online. We need to be critical, ask questions, check sources.
It's like the Socratic method is even more important now than ever.
I think so. It's a skill we need to consciously cultivate in the digital age. That ability to think for ourselves, to be discerning consumers of information.
Otherwise, we're just letting the algorithms think for us.
Exactly. And that's a dangerous place to be.
Okay, so we've been focusing a lot on the intellectual side of things. But Socrates wasn't just about logic and arguments. He was also deeply concerned with ethics, with living a good life.
Right, right. He believed that true wisdom wasn't just about knowledge, but about virtue, about living in accordance with what's right.
So how does the Socratic method apply to ethical dilemmas? Especially in our modern world, where it feels like everything is so complex and nuanced.
Well, that's where the Socratic method can be really helpful. It encourages us to examine our own values, to consider different perspectives, to think about the consequences of our actions.
So instead of just going with our gut reaction, we're taking a more thoughtful approach.
Exactly. And that can be challenging, right? Because ethical dilemmas often involve difficult choices. There's not always a clear right or wrong answer.
Right, and it's tempting to just avoid thinking about those things.
But the Socratic method pushes us to confront those difficult questions, to wrestle with them, to try to understand the complexities.
Can you give us an example of how this might work in practice?
Sure. Think about one of the big ethical issues we're facing today: artificial intelligence.
Okay, yeah.
AI has incredible potential, right? It can help us solve some of the world's biggest problems, but it also raises all sorts of ethical concerns.
Like privacy, bias, job displacement.
Exactly. And there are no easy answers. But the Socratic method can help us navigate these complexities by asking questions like, what are the potential benefits and risks of this technology? Who might be harmed? What are my own biases influencing my perspective?
It's about taking a step back and really examining the issue from all angles.
Right. And realizing that our initial gut reaction might not be the whole story. There might be other factors to consider, other perspectives to take into account.
So it's about being humble, being willing to admit that we don't have all the answers,
Exactly. And that's a key part of the Socratic method. It's about recognizing the limits of our own knowledge and being open to learning from others.
which in a way brings us back to that idea of dialogue, right?
Right.
That was so central to Socrates' approach. It wasn't just about him asking questions. It was about creating a space for shared inquiry, for learning from each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something we can all do, even today, whether it's in a classroom, online, or just in our everyday conversations.
By asking questions,
Hmm.
by challenging assumptions, by
Yeah.
being open to different perspectives.
Exactly. And in doing so, we're not only expanding our own understanding, but we're also contributing to a more thoughtful and compassionate world.
It's funny, when we talk about Socrates, I used to picture him like this stern, authority figure grilling people with questions.
Right, like some kind of philosophical police.
Yeah, exactly. But now I'm kind of seeing a different side.
Hmm.
It's like he's inviting us into this conversation,
Yeah.
encouraging us to question everything, to never stop learning.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. He wasn't just trying to like trip people up or make them feel stupid.
Right.
It was about getting closer to the truth. And that takes humility, being open to being wrong.
And that can be hard, can it? Especially these days. Everyone's got such strong opinions about everything.
Yeah, it's like everyone's an expert.
Right, and it's all got to be right or wrong, black or white.
Yeah.
There's no room for nuance.
Exactly. And that's something Socrates was really pushing against. He believed that truth is often complex and that the journey of getting there, of questioning and debating, is just as important as the destination.
It's about the process, not just the answer.
Exactly. And that process requires a certain level of, like, intellectual humility.
Okay, so intellectual humility, what does that mean exactly?
It means being willing to admit that you don't know everything, that you might be wrong, and being open to changing your mind when presented with new information.
So it's like the opposite of being dogmatic.
Right. It's about being curious, being open to new ideas.
And I think that's something we could all use a little more of, right?
Hmm.
Especially in our world today where it's so easy to get caught up in our own little bubbles.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because Socrates himself, he never actually wrote anything down.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, everything we know about him comes from the accounts of his students and contemporaries.
So like Plato's dialogues.
Exactly. And, there's something really powerful about that. He believed that true understanding came through dialogue, through the back and forth of conversation.
So not just reading or writing, but actually talking to each other.
Right. Engaging with different perspectives, challenging each other's ideas.
And it makes me wonder, in our world today, where so much communication is written, text, online, social media, are we losing something?
I think that's a really important question. Are we losing that ability to really connect with each other, to have those deep, meaningful conversations that can actually change our minds?
Yeah, because it's easy to hide behind a screen, right? To fire off a quick comment without really thinking things through.
Exactly. And you don't see the other person's reaction. You don't hear the nuances in their voice. It's just this, like, disembodied text.
And it's so easy to get caught up in the outrage cycle.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's got to have an opinion on everything. And it's got to be the right opinion.
Right. And if you disagree, you're the enemy.
Exactly. There's no room for nuance, for complexity. And I think that's something Socrates would really pushed against.
Yeah, because he was all about asking those hard questions, the ones that make you uncomfortable.
Right. And sometimes those questions don't have easy answers. But that's okay. It's about the journey of trying to figure things out.
So it's not about winning an argument, it's about understanding.
Exactly. And that requires a certain level of humility, a willingness to admit that you might be wrong.
And that's hard. It's so much easier to just stick to our own beliefs. Surround ourselves with people who agree with us.
Yeah. But that doesn't really challenge us to grow, does it?
No, not really. It's like we're just reinforcing our own biases.
Exactly. And that's why the Socratic method is so important. It pushes us to get outside of our comfort zones, to engage with different perspectives, to question everything.
And ultimately, to live a more examined life.
Right. And remember, Socrates believed that the unexamined life was not worth living.
So what does that mean for us today in this world of information overload and echo chambers and constant distraction?
I think it's a call to action, to be more mindful, more deliberate, to really think about the information we're consuming, the choices we're making, the values we're living by.
It's about taking responsibility for our own lives, our own thinking.
Exactly. And that's not always easy, but it's worth it. Because the more we question, the more we learn, the more we grow, and the closer we get to living a life that's truly meaningful.
So keep questioning, keep seeking, keep that Socratic spirit alive.
Exactly. And until next time, stay curious.